Welcome back to another episode of the Adventure Box podcast. Thank you so much for joining us in this new year. It is now 2025. No, you might not be watching this in January 6th of 2025, but at some point you will. And when you do this, you're going to be able to see some of the experiences that we've had because it's January 6th, 2025, and also experience everything that's happened afterwards. So in this time that we're talking about the American Revolution or other parts of history, we're going to bring in certain things that are happening these days so that you can experience the whole thing together. So not just history as it was, but history as it is being made right now. So we're adding some things into this. We're going to be adding like current events, things that you might want to think. Sometimes you might think, why are we learning about history? Why are we learning about the American Revolution? Well, through this, you're going to actually be able to see why it actually applies in these days. So this is a new addition that we're going to be adding on. Also, inside the curriculums, we're adding some new things as well, including new social studies lessons that'll help enhance. Now, as you'll find out, you should be receiving your curriculum this week or next week. But when you get the American Revolution curriculum, because that's what Mondays are about, American Revolution, Tuesday, when you get the Mesopotamian curriculum, you're going to see that there's, well, let's just go back to the American Revolution, because that's what we're talking about today. It's a big book. That's because the American Revolution has so much history. So this is not something we could keep within 400 pages. Sadly, we are trying to keep it within 400 pages, but there's so much information, and it's fascinating information. It's not just, oh, we had to put this in there because some standard told us to do it. No. We put this stuff in here because it's fascinating. It's interesting to learn about. And there's a lot of it. So if you like reading, great. Grab our textbook. You're going to love it because there's so much information in there. You're going to know more than most, let's just say, historians. You're going to learn a little bit more. Now, not if it's a historian that has to do with just the American Revolution, but say historians that have to do with like all world history. You're going to know more about the American Revolution than they will. Also, your teachers. Your teachers are probably going to know more about the American Revolution than your teachers do, because we go in a lot more than what a textbook goes into, because we actually talk about like how it applies and life lessons that you get, all these different things. So that's why it's so important to get to know to read the curriculum, parts of it. You don't have to read the whole thing. There's instructions in the beginning of how to read it. But this is how we are teaching you and being able to, seriously, I learned a lot by helping edit this book than I ever knew about the American Revolution. And you know what? Half of it I can't even remember now. So I'm going to have to go over it again because I'm excited to go back over it and read through everything. But now I actually understand for the first time. I mean, I went through history class and never really understood it. I now understand how history is structured with the American Revolution. How it started off with the acts. Then it went to the first movements, such as like the Battle of Lexington and Concord. But there's some things in there that no textbook's going to tell you. Then later on, talking about the different wars from New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, down into the South. I didn't know how it was all structured. But this class, you're actually going to learn it. You're going to learn it so well, you may not forget about it. Especially if you're playing historical conquest at the same time. Put those two things together. Oh, you're going to love this. Okay, so American Revolution. Time of, as it says, revolution, rebellion. This is when the United States, it wasn't the United States at the time. This is when the colonies, British colonies, remember, went against Britain. This is when they went against everyone else's standards and started to make their own path through life and through history. So this is the war that made the United States. The United States doesn't come until a little later. It's actually not going to come for almost like 2 more months, because we go through the birth of the nation, but basically by the end is when they actually are, I can't remember the word, it's an R word, when they're actually accepting the Constitution, ratifying. When they ratify the Constitution, when a state ratifies the Constitution, they become state. 8 of them had to join and sign on for the Constitution in order for it to be a country. And that doesn't happen until the very end of the Birth of the Nation curriculum. You're going to learn everything about that. When I thought the American Revolution was my favorite era, the favorite topic, I was actually wrong. Birth of the Nation, not what the textbooks would teach you, not that would class would teach you. No, but the way that we taught you through the curriculum, you'll walk away loving it. Now, there's going to be a lot of information, but you're going to actually be able to argue with the best of them when it comes to states' rights, when it comes to the reason why we have the electoral college when you vote. So not doing the popular vote, but the electoral college. This helps you with that. Things like that. The Second Amendment, the First Amendment. You're going to learn about all of these. So stay tuned for all that. This is why this part is so exciting. Learning about the American Revolution, so exciting because this is the beginning of the United States. So let's start off. Let's do a little recap to start off. French and Indian War. Now, was it the French and Indian War or was it the 7 Years' War? Yes, to both. So in the United States, it was called the French and Indian War. But the French and Indian War was actually part of the 7 Years' War. The 7 Years' War were over European countries fighting over Europe, India, Africa, and the Americas. Now, why is this so important? It's because the French and Indian War is basically what set up everything in order for the American Revolution to happen. If the French and Indian War didn't happen, it probably would have been a lot longer before the rebellion would have happened with the colonists to actually create the United States, or to fight the British and then go on to create the United States. The French and Indian War, how did it work? Well, at first, George Washington, yeah, you know that guy, this guy right here, right in the middle of this page, George Washington himself was actually the instigator, one of the instigators of the French and Indian War. Now, how did he do this? He was set out by his leaders, by his military officials, to go out and to tell the French to stop their building of forts. See, the French were coming into the territories that the British claimed their own, and because of that, they sent George Washington to tell them to stop coming in further and building more forts. So George Washington gets there, and he basically gets his butt kicked. Really? George Washington? No way, I love that guy. Well, yeah, everyone has to start somewhere. So George Washington basically gets sent back with his tail between his legs, and they didn't like that. So George Washington, he goes back out there, and what happens? He attacks what the French say was a scouting party. Okay, so the scouting party comes out and is going to tell George Washington that they are not going to move and that there needs to be some sort of peace treaty. That's the supposed what happened. But what actually happened was a little bit more. So George Washington during the night came and attacked that scouting party, and by doing that, took them captive. Now, during the night or during the day, nobody knows because no one's written on it, something happened. And a lot of their men, a lot of the French were killed. They think that it was actually the Native Americans getting revenge for things that have happened in the past and taking scalps. No one's exactly sure. But one of them was actually the brother of another military official. So that French military official comes down and attacks Fort Necessity, which is the fort that George Washington was building. It's really a horrible fort. Again, it's Fort Necessity. They were throwing it up because it was a necessity, because of winter, and because they wanted to have some sort of fort in the area to stop the French from moving forward. Well, as you can tell, the French, brought on by vengeance, took over Fort Necessity, took George Washington captive, and ended up having him sign a paper saying that he it was written in French, but it said that he basically killed the other French official, the brother of the new military leader that came to attack George Washington, the one that was part of the scouting party. So this actually started up the contentions between the French and the British. Now, the French and the British over in Europe were actually already fighting. They had just come off of the succession of Austrian No, wait. The War of Austrian Succession. Yes, it's basically where the let's see, the I'm trying to remember what the prime leader is. Basically, not the Constantine the Great was the emperor. Sorry, emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. Austria, the king, was actually the Holy Roman Empire at the time. When he died, it was supposed to go over to his daughter. Well, no other kingdom wanted a woman, for one, and wanted somebody that was not in the line to be taken over, to take that over. So they overthrew Austrians' succession, and declared war. From that point, that's the linchpin that started the French and Indian War over in Europe. Because of that, and because of what was happening with George Washington, the 7 Years' War began. Because the 7 Years' War began, the French and Indian War began. And that started with taking back some of the forts. And the British did a horrible job at the very beginning, really struggled at it, but then came back, and by taking over the French forts and what British thought was British territory, they then attacked Quebec, and then the next year attacked Montreal, and that ended French control over Canada. Yeah, that's basically it. That's then when they came back and signed the Treaty of Paris, the second one? First one. There's like 4 of them, 5 of them. I think it was 5 of them. So they signed the Treaty of Paris, and the war officially ended. Now, there's other battles that were going on, but now during the Treaty of Paris, there was actually something that was underhanded that was happening. The French made a deal with the Spanish to give up New Orleans and Louisiana. That was French owned. They gave it to the Spanish so that the British could not take it back. So after the treaty is signed and the lands go back to where they're supposed to be, and the new lands are claimed by Britain, as in Canada and the 13 colonies, that's when the war ended. But at that point, there was a lot of contention that was happening. A lot of contention. What was happening was the French were supporting the Native Americans. The Native Americans were trying to live their lives, being pushed out of the 13 colonies and trying to live in what they call the Indian Reserve. So when you play Historical Conquest, the expansion game, you'll see there's a large area that's called the Indian Reserve. It is a very powerful position to have in the game, but it was also a very powerful position for the Native Americans and also the settlers. The settlers wanted that land, so they continued to encroach in it, and because of that, the Native Americans came back, and so the first proclamation came out. This was a proclamation from the king to say no more can the settlers go into Native American land unless they have a signed agreement with the crown. The crown is the only one that could let you into the land. The settlers like, he's not my king. No representation. They tax us and they don't represent us. We're not going to agree on anything that the king says. Well, the king didn't like that. So he sent troops in there to control that area. Well, but what next did he do? Okay, so he did different acts, which we talked about in the French and Indian War. But then in 1765, he created what's called the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act was very important to understand because they wanted to basically put a stamp on everything that was sold in the colonies. If it wasn't stamped, it was counterfeit, it was smuggled, it was black marketed, and they didn't want that. So we're going to go over all of these different parts when we, let's see, on Wednesday. We're going to start going through the acts and what they were and how they affected basically the colonies before the American Revolution. But what then happened, a lot of contention is building up. I'm going to give you a recap of everything that's going to happen in the American Revolution, and then tomorrow we'll start on the actual revolution. Okay, so what's happening? There's a lot of rebellion that's happening. The Stamp Act goes out, the Sugar Act goes out, the Townsend Act goes out. There's all these different acts later to become the Coercion Acts. These are all basically the punishment of anything from the settlers trying to go into the Native American land, the settlers smuggling goods and not buying them straight from Britain, to all of a sudden, because there's so much rebellion, there's so much tension, they're so wound up. Both sides are so wound up. At some point, it's either going to snap or it's going to release. And you know, if you wind up something maybe like rubbery, you wind it up and wind it up, a rag, at some point you release that. How about a swing? You turn a swing around. If it's on a one line that comes down, and you put that swing on that line, and you turn it and turn it and turn it, it's like one of those tire swings. As soon as you release it, what happens? It goes crazy, it goes everywhere. So that's the same thing that happened when all of a sudden the British were doing things that the colonists didn't like. And that all of a sudden created what was called the Boston Massacre. We'll go over it later on. But because of the Boston Massacre, and because of the tea that was being, the Tea Act, that was being forced on the colonists that they had to buy tea, what happened next? The Boston Tea Party. Now, if you don't know these, don't worry about it. We're going to go over all of them. So because of the Boston Tea Party, the crown, the king, and the parliament basically said, hey, we're going to punish the people of Massachusetts by creating the Coercion Act, also called the Intolerable Acts. Now, these acts, Coercion Acts, not act, acts, and the Intolerable Acts were these punishments. Well, this is what basically set off the colonists to create the First Continental Congress. Now, here's the thing. They were meeting to set up the resistance. Because they were setting up their resistance, they didn't want anybody to know. They didn't want the crown to know. They didn't want Parliament to know. They also didn't want the spies that the British had all over the colonies to know what they were doing. And they held this meeting between September 5th and October 26th, 1774. So again, there's a large span between the Stamp Act and one second. Okay, sorry about that. So here we go. When the Continental Congress was in that time, there was a lot of contention that was happening. There were spies, there were soldiers in the area, and so they had to do it all in secret. And this Continental Congress is actually partially what set off the British to go and try to find John Adams. It wasn't John Adams. It was Samuel Adams, and I can't remember. We're going to go through all of this. I don't have my notes because I'm just going through the timeline. I have my timeline out, but not my notes. Okay, so during this time, they're going to capture those people while also making it so that they will go through and try to capture all the armaments of the colonists. So this is when they set out for Lexington and Concord. Now, before Lexington and Concord happens, and I'm going to go over a lot of this later on, there's a spy for the colonist side. I'm not going to tell you who that is. You're going to have to listen to that episode. But there's a spy in the governor's mansion who is getting information and feeding it to the colonists. The colonists find out how the British are going to go to Lexington and Concord, what their plans are. And the colonists set Paul Revere on the ride through Lexington. He never actually makes it to Concord because he's captured. And by the time he actually gets released, he basically goes back to Lexington. But there's other riders with him who do tell everyone what's going on. And in the end, the British get out to Concord, can't find the armaments they thought are out there, and actually have to retreat. As they're retreating, they actually lose a lot of soldiers. And they have to find their way back to Boston and basically protect themselves, fortify themselves in there. Now, Lexington and Concord happened April 19th, 1775. By May, the Second Continental Congress convenes. This is the real rebellion. They know they're in this. They have to get an army together. They have to get a military leader. George Washington has the most experience being from the French and Indian War. Now let's put him into the American Revolution. And this is when the Battle of Bunker Hill starts. This is when the siege of Boston occurs. So what happens? Boston is basically an island, and it's waiting out in the middle of Boston Harbor. Now, while they're there, they are fortifying the area. Now, you have sharpshooters around the sides who are picking off British people when they can. Now, British officers, I don't think they actually went after civilians. But they took out specific people that they could from the hills. But they always had to be careful because they might have gotten the sharpshooting through, but the cannonballs could go even further. So the cannonballs were very much pretty accurate for the British, where they were trying to fire on anybody that was attacking them. Now, during this time of Battle of Bunker Hill, there were some large hills that were up on the top of Boston Harbor. Now, those hills, Bunker Hill or Breed's Hill is the actual hill that they went after, but it's called the Battle of Bunker Hill, which is actually behind it. You have the British who capture Breed's Hill, and I'm not going to go through all the, there's so much information I want to tell you, much like Major Pitcairn, who was one of the military officers who gets shot. I'm not going to tell you anymore. But it's such a costly victory for the British that they basically come back, leave Breed's Hill, come back to Boston, and that's when they decide, we have to go. We have to leave. And so they make an agreement with George Washington, who is around the harbor, not in Boston, not in the harbor, around the harbor, with his soldiers, with the Continental Army that is being developed and trained right then. So at that point, George Washington makes an agreement. The British leave, and that's when they go up to Nova Scotia, and the colonists are like, wait a second, where's the next place that they will attack? Now, the Second Continental Congress is meeting in Pennsylvania. So a lot of the troops go up to Pennsylvania. Some of them go down to protect New York, but not enough. So, for that reason, the British are able to take over Long Island, then all of New York, and even into New Jersey, pushing George Washington back. George Washington is losing fight over fight over fight. He's not doing very well in managing the battles. He's doing the best he can, but the British are very well trained and very intelligent when it comes to military strategy. The Continental Army, not so intelligent when it comes to the actual soldiers, because most of them have never seen battle before. So they go through all these different battles. Okay, now there are some other battles that are very important to understand. British take over New York, New Jersey. They then take over Pennsylvania, but then they lose Pennsylvania and they have to go back to New York. So they're situated in New York. The colonists, or the British, send more troops down to the south and they start attacking the south. So the colonists start going down to the south and setting up their armies there to take over or to fight back. So this is, oh, and shall I forget? The only reason why we won was a major portion of why we won, besides the hearts of the people, the help of the French. So in February 6, 1778, there's an alliance with the French. The French and the United States team up. The French do most of their work on the waters with their ships. They do have some French on land who actually trained the Continental Army on how to fight. But this starts a few other battles down south. You have the capture of Savannah, which basically spurs, and that was a British victory, but that basically spurs them to go on to Charleston, because they had a major victory there as well. This is all around 1780. And then all of a sudden it changes. It turns around. And key American victories start happening in the south. Kings Mountain, Battle of Cowpens. You have now this was actually, this is an interesting one. The Battle of Guilford Courthouse is actually like a win for the colonists at first, and then the British basically take it back over. It's a really interesting story. We'll get there when we get there. So by October 19th, 1781, there's a siege on Yorktown. British General Cornwallis had basically left the courthouse and left all their other areas and came back to Charleston, to Yorktown to try to solidify their attack. Now, interesting enough, there's actually another soldier on the British side, an officer who is a butcher. We're going to go over what he did, but there's some major things that are going on. Even when Cornwallis surrenders to George Washington, the battle does not end. Finally, now this is 1783, October 19th, 1781. So October 1781 is when Cornwallis surrenders. But the treaty doesn't even get signed until September 3rd, 1783, the Treaty of Paris. Again, very significant. It takes 2 years. Why? Because when you're writing a treaty, there's a lot to go over. And there's still battles that are happening during that time. Skirmishes and full-on battles. This is what we will be covering in the next few weeks. So we've got, in this one, I think 5 weeks that we will be going over the American Revolution because it's so big. So have fun with the things that we're sending you via the adventure box. You don't really have a craft because you have an expansion game. You have a $50 game in that box when the box itself costs $50. So have fun with the game. Send me any emails you might have while you're playing that. You're going to learn about every one of these attacks, every one of these battles in this game, and in your curriculum. You're going to know them left and right, backwards and forwards. It's going to be great. You're going to be so well informed when it comes to the American Revolution and everything it does. Oh, but I cannot wait until next month when I talk to you about the birth of the nation. That is where it really starts getting good. And all of our curriculum is just getting better. We are learning certain things in these curriculums that you want to make them better. So every time we develop a new curriculum or finish a new curriculum from editing and such, we're going to add on just a little snippets of certain things to make it more exciting, more enjoyable, and help you to increase your retention and understanding of what you're experiencing. So thanks for joining me on this great Adventure Box Day. We will catch you next time. Actually, we will catch you tomorrow as we go more into the final ends of ancient Israel as we prepare to go into ancient Mesopotamia. We're getting really good in this. So can't wait to talk to you tomorrow. Stay tuned. Bye-bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, actually. Take care. Bye.